Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for the Wexford-Missaukee Career Technical Center Area of Interest MPART Town Hall. My name is Mike Gurney. I'm with Eagle's Environmental Support Division. I've got just a couple quick intro slides here before I hand it off to Abby Hendershot with MPART. So if you can kick the next slide, please. A couple, like I said, housekeeping items. All lines are muted today during the webinar, and they'll remain muted throughout the webinar. We are recording this webinar. If you want to hit the next slide. We will have a question and answer portion at the end of the webinar today. So please, even though lines are muted, if you're able to sit at the computer, submit your questions in the question and answer box in your Zoom toolbar. That'll be down at the bottom of your screen. Submit those questions throughout the webinar. We'll get to those at the end. If you do have a question during that question and answer that you'd like to ask out loud, you can raise your hand. If you are on the phone, that'll be a pound or hash and the number 2. I'll remind you that at the end there. But and with that, you can hit the next slide. I will hand it over to Abby Hendershot.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. I am Abigail Hendershot. I'm MPART Executive Director for the Michigan Pfas Action Response Team. Happy to be with you today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining a virtual town hall on what we're calling a Wexford-Missaukee Career Technical Center Area of Interest. And so I see we already have one question about getting a recording, a copy of this recording. We will send out, we'll have copies of the PDF of the slides as well as a copy of the recording. It does take about a few days to get the closed caption done, so but that will be available through Eagle's website. So let's go to the next slide. So tonight, I'm going to kick things off with introductions and agenda. Steve Kittler, our district supervisor for MPART in the Cadillac district office, is going to take us through an MPART overview. Lisa Fisher, our toxicologist with Department of Health and Human Services, is going to go through PFAS and health questions you might have. And Caitlin Bertram is our project manager for this investigation area with Eagle, and she is going to take you through some of the data that we have currently. And then District 10 Health Department staff are here and are going to talk about PFAS and home filters because we have been getting some questions about that. And then we'll come back at the very end and I will talk a little bit more about MPART website, making sure you understand about all the different resources we have on our website that's available. And then we'll plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. So feel free to, as Mike said, type in your questions, and as you are thinking of them, we will go ahead and go through all of those at the very end and make sure your questions are answered. So with that, let's go to the next slide. All right, I will pass it over to Steve Kittler, our PFAS regional lead for the Cadillac district office. Steve.
Hi there. I'll give you just a brief video feed just to make sure I patched in when I give this presentation. So next slide, please. So a little bit about MPART. MPART was created as an enduring body under the governor's executive order. It ensures 7 state agencies work together on PFAS in a coordinated fashion. MPART also works with the federal government on several programs and projects. And when we get down to the specific project level, we work with local officials and with the health department. Next slide, please. So a few things about per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, excuse me, or PFAS. PFAS are a class of man-made chemicals that have one of the strongest bonds in chemistry. They act as surfactants, are highly stable. They repel water, oil, fat, and grease. Industry began developing PFAS compounds in the 1940s, and there are over 5,000 of these today. We're concerned about PFAS because they're widespread in the environment, don't break down easily, are hard to treat. Some bioaccumulate, meaning they can build up in our bodies and those of fish and wildlife. And some may affect health, which will be covered later on in this presentation. And with 5,000 chemicals present, we're over those present. There are a lot of chemicals that we don't have a lot of information on. Another concern is there's a lack of national standards when it comes to PFAS. Next, please. So PFAS uses, a lot of you may know about this. Because of their water repellent and oil, or call it stain repellent characteristics, they're used on furnishings, home furnishings, and fabrics, carpet, and things like also for nonstick cookware. So there's quite a few. So next, please. So this figure is intended to show two things: how PFAS compounds enter the environment. It also coincides with some of the places we're sampling for them. So I'll go through this from left to right, starting with industry on the left. So we have industry using PFAS materials. Some could enter the environment because there's a release, an accidental release of those to the groundwater from that facility. There could be a direct discharge to a surface water from wastewater discharge, containing PFAS to a stream. Some industrial operations discharge to wastewater treatment plant. Unfortunately, the treatment plants aren't set up to effectively treat PFAS, which results in a discharge again to the surface water body. A byproduct of the wastewater treatment plant is something called biosolids, and those could be land applied. And when they're land applied, there's a possibility they could contaminate groundwater or run off into a stream. They also could be taken up by plants and enter our food supply. And lastly, relative to drinking water, our sources of drinking water may come from surface water or groundwater, and those can be contaminated by PFAS. And in this particular case, and so many other of our MPART projects, residential well sampling is a key component. And we work with our partners in Department of Health and Human Services and local health department to determine the scope of res well sampling. Next, please. So Michigan has 7 standards, 7 PFAS that have standards that are listed here. Those are acronyms. I'm showing you this because these will probably show up later on in our presentation when we're discussing some data. So these are the ones we have standards. And just one other note is that the PPT that's listed behind these, that's parts per trillion, which again will be shown later. Next, please. I wanted to make sure I noted that we have, there's comprehensive surface water sampling being conducted throughout the state, which includes lakes and streams. The water's being sampled. In some cases, the fish are also being sampled. And the reason this is being done is to identify places that are being impacted, and then find the source of that contamination, and then remove it. So it's no longer impacting the surface water. Next, please. Well, currently, there are 207 sites in the state where PFAS has been in groundwater has been documented above our state standard. This would include places like military installations, landfills, industrial sites, and airports. If you compared it to other places, other states, it's likely we have much more than have been identified in other places. This isn't because Michigan is more contaminated with PFAS, but we've been more proactive and diligent, we'll say, finding these. So there are a lot more sites out there, I'm sure, than are listed in here where PFAS is impacted the environment. We're researching these. We continue to do that, and there's a priority scheme we set in doing that that's based on their potential impacts to public health, particularly through the drinking water source. Next slide. So a last note is about the Citizens Advisory Work Group, which is called the COG. And the COG is made up of members from different communities that have been impacted by PFAS. And the COG has two major charges. One is to provide recommendations to MPART on how to better engage and empower the communities. And then the other one is educate the public. The COG is on the webpage on PFAS response on the PFAS response website that includes its charter, meeting location, meeting information and members. And those interested in becoming a member can submit a registration form found on the COG webpage. Next, please. And that would be the end of my section, and we'll leave it to Lisa Fisher.
All right, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so my name is Lisa Fisher, and I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, also known as DHHS. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about our role in PFAS investigations and some of the potential health outcomes associated with PFAS exposure. Next slide. So our role is to understand the health concerns facing your community. And so while EGLE leads the site investigation and is the agency or department collecting the data, DHHS works with the local health department to lead any public health planning and response actions that may be needed. So, our base goal is to evaluate potential PFAS exposure to residents and then recommend public health actions as needed. Next slide. So like Steve said, there's a lot of different ways or a lot of different products that contain PFAS, which means there's a lot of different ways that we can be exposed to PFAS. The main pathway of exposure that we're concerned about is by drinking contaminated water. But some other pathways of exposure to PFAS would include eating fish that are caught in water bodies that contain PFAS. I'll touch on Eat Safe Fish guidelines, how you can find out more information about that. Some other pathways include incidental swallowing of contaminated soil or dust, or by eating foods that are packaged in materials that contain PFAS. And then overall, just the use of consumer products that may contain PFAS. And then PFAS absorption through the skin is typically not a concern. We're more concerned with the ingestion pathway. So anytime that you would be, consuming PFAS through your mouth. Next slide. So this is a graph that shows blood levels of 4 different PFAS compounds in Americans from the years 2000 to 2014. And it's important to note that in 2002, US manufacturers started phasing out the use of PFOS. And you can see that reflected in blood levels of PFOS between 2000 and 2014. There's been a pretty steady decrease in PFOS levels during that time. But while US manufacturers have stopped using PFOS and in many cases PFOA, they've been replacing them with different kinds of PFAS that typically have a shorter half-life, so they spend less time in the human body. But we just don't have a lot of health effects data for some of these other PFAS that are being used in commerce. Next slide. So we have the most information about associated human health outcomes with 2 specific types of PFAS, and that's PFOA and PFOS. So some of the health outcomes associated with high exposure to these PFAS include reduced fertility, high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnant women, small decreases in infant birth weight, and higher cholesterol, specifically total and LDL cholesterol. Next slide. And some other health effects include thyroid disease, liver damage, decreased immune system response to vaccines, and for high PFOA exposure, kidney and testicular cancer. And it's important to note that just because an individual has been exposed to a high level of one of these PFAS doesn't mean that they will develop these health effects, since there's many factors that go into the development of these diseases. Next slide. So when we're determining whether any public health response actions are needed, we look at multiple lines of evidence and multiple lines of consideration. So we have the MDHHS comparison values, which are health-based screening levels that we use for different PFAS to determine whether there's a potential risk to public health. We also look at the residential well results, both for an individual home and in the collective area. And we also look at site-specific information, such as whether there's a known source in the area or any potential sources, what the geology in the area looks like, and we get a lot of that information from Eagle. Next slide. So our comparison values are a combination of two different health-based values. That includes both the MDHHS public health drinking water screening levels and the MPART health-based values, which are also the maximum contaminant levels if we were talking about a public water supply. And so both of these health-based values were set to protect everyone. So they include sensitive populations such as fetuses and breastfed babies, but they also protect for the general population as well. Next slide. And this is a slide that shows what the comparison values are for the 7 PFAS that we have health-based standards for. Next slide. So I mentioned this a couple of slides ago that when we do residential well sampling, we're going to look at an individual home's results. And if generally, if they're over one of the comparison values, we'll offer a point of use filter that's certified to reduce PFAS. So that's kind of an easy one. You know, if they're over a certain comparison value, then we decide that there may be a public health concern and we provide a point of use filter. But we also look at situations where maybe a home has some PFAS and it's surrounded by homes that don't have any PFAS. In those situations, we may decide that a filter is not necessary because they're not exceeding the comparison values, and based on other site information, you know, we don't think that there's contamination of PFAS in groundwater. But there may also be a situation where a home has low-level detections of PFAS, but they're surrounded by homes that exceed our comparison values, or there's some information that Eagle has collected about the site where we think that the home may be impacted in the future. We may decide to proactively offer that home in the middle a filter just to make sure they're protected in the future. Next slide. And like I said, we really lean on Eagle to collect site-specific information. So they usually do a pretty good survey of any known or potential sources of PFAS in the area. We also take a look at the geology in the area. So things like whether it's a very sandy area where PFAS can move through the soil quickly to groundwater, versus if there's a lot of clay in the area that may act as a barrier for PFAS where it can't get into the groundwater. That's always important information to know. And then as well as well depth, you know, typically for any contaminant, shallower wells are generally more at risk for contamination issues, and that's true for PFAS as well. And so we want to know if people have a deep well or a shallow well, because that may impact whether we think PFAS contamination may be occurring as well. And then if there is an identified source and there's been work that shows kind of if there's a plume in the groundwater, so basically like kind of showing where groundwater may be impacted and the direction that that plume may be moving in, then that can help us determine if there's homes that maybe haven't been sampled yet, but may need to be sampled in the future. or we just may need to proactively take some sort of public health response to a wider area, just depending on where that plume is going or headed. Next slide. So we may decide that no public health actions are necessary. Typically that happens at sites where there's either no residential wells in the area, so there's no complete pathway where people are being exposed to PFAS that may be in groundwater, or it may be that we sampled residential wells and no one really had any detections of PFAS, or they were all below comparison values. That does happen at certain sites. At other sites, we may recommend a point of use filter, like I mentioned, and those are NSF and SI certified to reduce PFAS, or we may recommend use of alternate water, such as bottled water. And this is designed to be an interim response action. It's not a long-term solution, it's a short-term solution. And it gives us time to conduct the investigation and find out more information about the site while protecting the residents from any potential fluctuation in PFAS levels and further exposure to PFAS. And we also provide educational materials about PFAS in drinking water. We provide this information in results letters, and there's also a ton of information on the MPART website, which I know Abby is going to go through later. Next slide. And so I'll just end with a little plug for our Eat Safe Fish program. So MDHHS has fish consumption guidelines for water bodies across the state. And you can find those guidelines at michigan.gov/eatsafefish. And if you can't find your water body in those guides, we also have statewide guidelines that you can use to help you make informed decisions about, which fish you should be eating and how many servings per month. So I will end there and I will turn it over to Caitlin. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. So I am Caitlin Bertram, and I'm with the Remediation Redevelopment Division within Eagle, and I will be going over the area of interest investigation with you. So the Wexford-Missaukee area of interest is located on the east side of Cadillac, as you can see from this figure here. Here is a zoomed in aerial of the area of interest. It encompasses the Wexford-Missaukee Intermediate School District, and the Career Tech Center is one of the buildings within the Intermediate School District. You can see residences to the west and to the south of the site. Baker College and the YMCA are also located to the south of the site. So before I go into the site investigation, I thought it would be helpful to go over the background to help explain how this became an area of interest. So in June of 2019, Eagle completed some proactive PFAS sampling at the drinking water wells at the Intermediate School District. This sampling showed that PFAS was present, but it was below criteria. It is important to note that at this time, the only criteria that we had was 70 parts per trillion PFOA plus PFOS. This sampling continued until August of 2020. So in August of 2020, the drinking water criteria changed as MCLs were promulgated for 7 different PFAS compounds, like what Steve went over earlier in this presentation. Then in October of 2020, the Intermediate School District began sampling the drinking water wells under the Safe Drinking Water Act. PFNA was detected above the MCL in the Career Tech Center building of the Intermediate School District. This resulted in quarterly monitoring. In October of 2021, the Intermediate School District received notice from the local health department that PFNA exceeded the MCL. The ISD immediately notified all users of their well of this exceedance. This MCL also resulted in MPART designating this location as a PFAS area of interest, and it also resulted in the residential well sampling of the area. So what do we know about the area? The Michigan Geological Survey section put together a triage package that contains geological information from around the area. From this triage package, we know that groundwater at this location is encountered at approximately 65 feet below ground surface. Groundwater is also assumed to be flowing to the west-northwest, and surface water in the area flows west and then towards the Clam River. So this image was taken from Google Earth, and it just shows the site, Clam River, and then also the assumed groundwater flow direction. So where is the PFAS at this area coming from? When we first received the drinking water results from the sampling at the Intermediate School District, we began looking for potential sources for the detections. However, there are not any landfill, platers, or other known industries located near the Wexford-Missaukee Intermediate School District that would be an obvious source for this PFAS. As Steve mentioned earlier in this presentation, fire training is also a potential source for PFAS contamination. So we took a look to see if any fire training occurred at the Intermediate School District that could have resulted in the PFAS contamination. None occurred. While we were looking into the potential fire training, we did find out that there was a fire on the property back in the 80s. However, Class A foam was used to put it out, and Class A foam is not known to contain PFAS contamination. We were also able to access historical imagery of the area to try to determine if perhaps a past use of the area could have resulted in the PFAS contamination. We were able to access imagery dating back to 1952, but the land was vacant. So based on all this information, we really aren't sure what the source of the PFAS is. If we had to take a guess, we would speculate that multiple septic systems are the probable source. So this slide shows the historical imagery that I mentioned on the previous slide. You can see the Wexford-Missaukee Intermediate School District's location in the first photo. And the second photo is that yellow highlighted area overlain with an image from 1952. And as you can see, it's just vacant land. So because of the MCL violation of PFNA in the well at the Wexford-Missaukee Intermediate School District Career Tech Center building, we wanted to evaluate the residential wells down gradient of the site. We sent out 30 access agreements to the homes immediately to the south and to the west of the site. We were able to sample 27 of the 30 homes. 3 of these homes came back with results above drinking water criteria. 1 home was at drinking water criteria. 17 homes had detections but were below drinking water criteria. And 6 of these homes were non-detect for PFAS compounds. So AECom was a contractor that completed the residential well sampling on behalf of MPART, and they put together this heat map summarizing the data that was gathered from the residential well sampling. So the red circles on this map are the homes that exceeded the drinking water criteria. The orange circle is a home that was at drinking water criteria, and the yellow homes had detectable levels of PFAS contamination, but were below drinking water criteria. The green homes were non-detect, and the white circles are homes that we did not receive signed access to sample. It should be noted that only 1 home had any detections of PFNA, which was the constituent that was detected above MCLs at the Career Tech Center's well. All other homes were non-detect for PFNA. So earlier in my presentation, I mentioned that the Intermediate School District has wells on the property that are sampled under the Safe Drinking Water Act. These wells are sampled quarterly. This slide sort of shows the results of the well sampling. This map shows the very approximate location of these wells. These wells were most recently sampled on February 8th, 2022. And the results from the sampling are shown next to the wells. The well in the lower left corner is the well at the Career Tech Center building that previously contained the PFNA above MCLs. During the February sampling event at the Career Tech Center's well, it came back with 3 parts per trillion of PFNA. It also had other PFAS compounds detected, as you can see on the slide. The northernmost well is the well at the Special Services building within the Intermediate School District. This well contained PFOA at 9 parts per trillion, along with other PFAS compounds. And the third well is at the General Education Building, and it was non-detect for all PFAS constituents. Baker College and the YMCA are located south of the area of interest, and they also have drinking water wells that are sampled under the Safe Drinking Water Act. The most recent sampling was conducted on February 2nd, 2022, and the results were non-detect. Herring Township is the closest municipal water supply to the Wexford-Missaukee area of interest. These wells are also sampled under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and you can see the results of the wells here on this slide. There are detections of PFAS in the municipal wells, however, they are below the MCLs. So this slide shows the municipal water main from Herring Township's wells. The wells are located here in the northwest corner of this figure. And again, we are not sure what the source of the PFAS is. These wells are over 250 feet deep and beneath multiple clay layers. This blue line on the map is the water main for the area. And as you can see from the map, the water main ends right before the PFAS area of interest. So what are the next steps? So Herring Township will sample the municipal wells annually under the Safe Drinking Water Act. The Wexford-Missaukee Intermediate School District will sample their wells quarterly under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the Wexford-Missaukee ISD, Herring Township, local health department, and Eagle will work together to find options for long-term solutions. And DHHS will sample residential wells again in 6 months. And this site contains the different contact information for some of the topics that I just covered. There are a lot of different divisions within Eagle working on the site, and a lot of different departments are working together in this area of interest as well. And now I will let the local health department talk.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie with District Health Department number 10. And we're just going to give you some brief information about the home filters that we are providing for residents who have deemed it appropriate to have these home filters. So next slide. So I just wanted to provide you really quickly with who your health department PFAS team is. So we have Kevin, who is our health officer, Michael, our environmental health director, Megan is our environmental health supervisor, and then myself, the PFAS health educator. Many of you have probably already talked to me on the phone or received a letter from me. So this is your health department team. Next slide, please. We just wanted to provide some information for you about what to expect when you are picking up your filtration system. So we do ask that when you come to the health department to pick up your point of use filter, that you bring with you either your MDHHS or District Health Department number 10 letter. That is just proof that you are eligible to receive the filter and helps us with tracking purposes. What you'll get when you receive this filter is a filter and 1 box of replacement cartridges that are good for a total of 1 year. We will also provide you with a phone number for you to call a plumber who will come to your home and actually install the filter for you free of charge. And then we will also provide you with instructions on how to maintain your filter, how to replace your cartridges, and what to do if a part breaks. We also provide information on if you were to leave your home for the winter, what you would need to do for your system as well. Next slide. All right, so a little bit about the filter that you will be receiving. As you heard before, your filter is a certified filter by both the NSF and the ASFI. So that is just important to note. Also, it is certified to reduce the PFOA and the PFOS chemical level. But according to the manufacturer, even though it's only certified for those, it also is able to cover all other PFAS chemicals as well. So that's just important to note. We also have here that it is typically installed under your kitchen sink, and it is to be used, again, as you heard earlier, for primarily cooking and drinking. One of the things we wanted to note is that this filter is also going to stay with the home where the drinking water is affected. So that's a question that we hear sometimes is, can I take this filter with me if I were to move? No, the filter does need to stay with the house. Another thing we wanted to note here is that each filtration cartridge will filter water for approximately 6 months or up to approximately 800 gallons of water. So you will have to come into the health department every 6 months or so to get a new filtration cartridge. What's nice about these is they do have some notification systems so that it will let you know when the cartridge needs to be replaced. And then when everything is said and done and you need to throw away these cartridges, it can just be done in the household trash. Next slide. So my last slide here is just for filter questions or concerns. Like I mentioned earlier, I am your main contact, but we also have Megan, and she can be a secondary contact as well if for whatever reason you were not able to get a hold of me. And we will also be a part of the question and answer portion later on in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Abby Hendershot back here with you. Caitlin, if I can have you go ahead and press on the michigan.gov PFAS response and take us to the MPART webpage. Thank you. So a couple things. This is the main landing page for the MPART website. I'm going to draw your attention to the middle of the page. You can scroll back down here. In the middle of the page, we've got a couple of things I want to show you. First one is that all the public meetings like you're attending today are on a calendar right there in the middle of the guide. All of our PFAS sites, if you can press that, Caitlin. And let's go to this one just so people understand where they're at. You can either use the web map or scroll down and see if it pops up. Get the data, and you can use the search bar to just type in Wexford-Missaukee, or just type in Wexford, probably the easiest, and it comes right up. So all of the information that we've shared today, that basic map is there, the information for Caitlin's information is there, as well as a summary of the site. So just know that that information is there, and then we will continue to keep this updated as we go through time. And if you can go back one, the other thing I just wanted to show you, maybe go back to, is the Citizens Advisory Work Group tab is there on the bottom right-hand corner. If you want to join us as a Citizens Advisory member, please, we're always looking for new members. Happy to have you. There is a very simple application form you send in and you can join us. And even if you don't want to join right away, all of those Citizens Advisory Work Group meetings are on the calendar and are open to the public. So join us anytime. One last thing I want to show you, Caitlin, if you can go over to the left-hand side where it says PFAS Information Systems and click that over to the left right there. Sweet. This is a GIS application we've recently put out on our website for our public to be able to see all of our sites. And so what I want to be able to show you here is that if you can click the layer button in the right-hand top corner, yep, right there. What you're seeing on this map are PFAS sites, surface water sampling, and public water sampling supplies for the different municipal water systems around the state. And so if you can zoom in on the Cadillac Wexford area, we can just show everybody that again, you can see either the sampling data for the Cadillac drinking water system for Herring Township, or you can, oops, I think we probably got to go up to the green triangle to hit the PFAS site. There should be our PFAS, oh, because it's an area of interest. The areas of interest, we aren't listing as official MPART sites because this one is not designated as a official MPART site, but it is actually in the list. So it's a little bit different notification on this one. But all of our official PFAS sites, which are those that are a source of groundwater contamination and have an exceedance of groundwater criteria, those are the ones that we're actually listing with the purple triangles. So this information is there. And then Caitlin, if you can scroll out just a little bit and click on one of the green squares, I just want to show everybody that we've done over 2,000 samples of surface water around the state. And all of those samples are actually there. All the analytical is there, all of the data, all of those Ks that you see on this are actually non-detect. And so the number above them represent the detection limit for the analytical method that was. And then you'll see often at the top of these that they say 1 of 6. That's because there are in some cases repeat samples for those same water bodies or in different depths. You'll see that across the state. So just wanted to point this kind of information out because there is quite a bit of a wealth of information for our public out there. So if we can go back one more time to the main page. The other thing I'll just point out is there is quite a bit of information here for the public. There's information on laboratories that offer home testing. There's a whole bunch of drinking water for private residential well owner information, PFAS and fish. Like I said, a ton of information. So let's leave that one alone for right now, and we'll go back to the main presentation, and then let's open it up for questions and answers, because I see we've got some questions that are brewing, and I think we're probably ready to have Mike come back and lead us through the questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And thanks, Abigail, Steve, Caitlin, and Katie for the presentation. We do have a handful of questions here. So I will just start kind of running down the list. So we had one question here about what other states have for PFAS standards, and specifically what neighboring states have. And there's a follow-up about kind of federal PFAS standards, if there's anything like that coming down, but maybe starting with neighboring states.
Let's so I'll take that one, Mike. So there are only a handful of other states in the country that have PFAS standards at this point. There's a couple of states out east that do have drinking water standards. Minnesota has set some surface water quality. Both Illinois and Wisconsin are in the process of trying to set drinking water standards, MCLs, for municipal water supplies. You know, it's a slow process for them, so they're in that process, but it'd probably be a few years yet before they actually get that established. The EPA has put out a whole roadmap of PFAS work that they are embarking on, including setting drinking water standards for the nation. So that would be applicable to all municipal water supplies for PFOA, PFOS, and they are attempting to start doing that this year, but it will be probably a 18-month process for them to get through. So they're looking at probably December-ish of 2023 before they get through that process. They also have a whole bunch of other PFAS initiatives that they're going through, including making PFOA and PFOS a hazardous substance under CERCLA or Superfund law, and looking at PFAS for a risk assessment for biosolids. So there's quite a bit of work going on at EPA, but as far as where Michigan is in comparison, we're pretty well ahead of everybody else as far as doing a full survey of the state and understanding the status of our different media and our different industries. So I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. So another question is related to the filters and disposal of those filters. So the question really is focused on by throwing those out, going into a landfill, there's the potential for those to break down and just potentially recontaminate over time. So can you talk about maybe how that works? Are there standards for disposing of those filters, or how that works to dispose of those safely?
Yeah, and I totally understand our citizens, concern there. That does make sense. There are a lot of things that contain PFAS that go into our landfill, our normal type 2 landfills. But for the small quantity that these filters are, this isn't a significant source for landfills, so it is the proper place for it. When you get to the very large carbon canisters that water filtration systems would use for our drinking water plants or wastewater plants, those are then regenerated and are refreshed, so to speak, by the different carbon manufacturers around the country. So with these small quantities, the landfill is really the best place for them so that it can be taken out of your drinking water.
Great, thank you. Is filtered water, so when the filter is installed, is filtered water going to be tested to ensure the effectiveness, or how are residents ensured that the filters that are installed are working appropriately?
Lisa, do you want to take that one? I know DHHS has done quite a bit of sampling on the efficacy of the home filters that are installed.
Yeah, so at different PFAS sites across the state, we've been resampling homes that have filters approximately 6 months to a year after those filters are installed. And they've been extremely effective at removing not just PFOA and PFOS that they're certified to remove, but all the PFAS that we're currently testing for. It's pretty remarkable how effective they are. The reason why we typically wait until 6 months after those filters have been installed is because those filters are supposed to last for about 6 months. And again, that's the manufacturer's instructions. They do have, I think Katie said they have like a warning system that lets you know when that cartridge needs to be changed, because it is based on your water use. But typically those filters will last for about 6 months. So that's why after 6 months, we want to go back and resample just to see how effective those filters are working. And overall at the different sites that we've been resampling at, I mean, those filters are working extremely well.
Great, thank you. And actually, this might be another one for you while I got you. Is there a program, is there a way for citizens to test their bodies, their blood for the contaminants? Is there anything out there for that?
As far as testing your blood for PFAS, that would be a conversation to have with your physician.
Okay.
I would say that it's just an indicator of the amount of PFAS in your blood at the time that the blood sample was taken. And because PFAS is so common in our everyday use, pretty much all of us have some level of PFAS in our blood. So it's difficult to say, it's impossible to say whether the level of PFAS in your blood is either responsible for a health condition that you have or may cause a health condition in the future. It's really just kind of a snapshot in time kind of level that you would get if you had your blood tested for PFAS, but feel free to have that conversation with your physician.
Great, thank you. So there's a question here with the new EJ screen that's coming out. Is there a layer available that either overlaps from the GIS function on the MPART website that functions with that EJ screen? Do you know if there's anything on the EJ screen that plays into the PFAS sites around the state?
That's a great question. And no, the EJ screen just went live fairly recently. So we haven't looked at trying to kind of marry in that functionality, but I think that's a great example of an instance that where we would want to. So I will be asking about that with our environmental justice advocate office that we have within Eagle and see what kinds of options we have to do that.
Great, thank you. Couple questions here about the 6-month time frame. Will all residential wells be retested in 6 months, whether they had a detection or not, or is it just those with a detection?
Yeah, anyone whose well has already been sampled is eligible for resampling, just as long as they give us access.
Great, thank you. And then can you talk about why that 6th month was decided? So obviously people are drinking this water. They're interacting with this water on a daily basis. There's concerns about just the sensitive populations, young children, older adults. So why is 6 months that timeline? Why not quicker?
Yeah, so again, those cartridges that come with the filter are typically, good for 6 months. So that's why we want to come back in 6 months and see if the filters are still being effective. If someone is concerned about, if the filter is working right now, they're always welcome to have the water sampled. We have a list of laboratories on the MPART website that will accept PFAS water samples from home. So that's always an option if people want to do that as well.
Great, thank you.
I see, Mike, there's another question along that way about the comment that in most cases the filters work. I think we have not had an instance where the filter, when properly installed and used, that it has failed. I know we've had lots of different types of filters go in, but the one that DHHS and the local health department has been providing are the ones that are being tested for efficacy. And Lisa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've had an instance where we've had a detection above a criteria come back.
No, and in my experience, I have not seen one that comes back with any detections. I'm a scientist. I don't like to say, I don't like to speak in certainties or 100%. That's why I say in most cases. But I mean, it's possible that there's one out there that I'm not aware of, but I'm not personally aware of any post-filter samples that have been taken that have shown levels of PFAS. Yeah.
And Lisa, tell our listeners about how many samples we've taken, because we've got over, I want to say probably 1,000 to 2,000 filters out in the state right now.
Yeah, I don't have a number on how many,
but it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's got to be at least 1,000, I would think. Yeah.
And we are doing testing. So we've been using these same filters. I honestly have one in my own home that I also use. Actually, I have them in all my homes because they not only take out PFAS, but they take out other volatile organics, and they take out heavy metals and nitrates, which I find nice. So, but we've not found in the last 4 or 5 years that we've been using and installing these across the state. I don't think we've had any true failures of them when they're properly used. So hopefully that puts everybody's, angst to rest.
Great, thank you. There's a couple questions here that I'm gonna kind of lump together. Obviously a lot of these houses have just more than the one faucet, and so there's questions on opportunities to provide whole house systems, point of entry systems. Are there any sort of opportunities for that sort of solution?
I can start, Lisa, and you can jump in, because we don't consider these filters to be long-term solutions. We don't want to, again, a whole house system is not something that we would consider a long-term solution. And so I don't have the money to do the whole house filters when we can put it on the main drinking faucet and Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong, but ingestion while you're brushing your teeth is not a big deal. It's where you're going to drink. You're going to be repeatedly drinking large quantities of this water over time. You want to jump in on that, Lisa?
Yeah, exactly. And so things like, bathing, doing your laundry, taking a shower, you washing your dishes, things where, you might be in skin contact with water that contains PFAS is really not a concern. That PFAS is not going to absorb very easily through your skin. So we're really only concerned about the ingestion pathway. So having a filter put on your source where you're getting your drinking water from, or where you're using, water to cook food or make baby formula. That's where we want to make sure that the residents are protected. And again, it's a short-term response while the investigation is ongoing. And, we have in the past, if there's, like a duplex situation where there's like more than one person in the home, or maybe there's a person in the home that has mobility issues and has a hard time getting up and down the stairs, we're more than happy to provide, more than one filter if there's a reasonable reason to have another filter. So we're happy to provide another point of use filter as well, if that's applicable.
Great, thank you. Abby, you touched on long-term solutions. So I know we're talking about filters here today, but there's a couple questions about, looking at maybe some of either the infrastructure dollars or some other, if there's funding available for permanent long-term solutions. There's questions about hooking up to municipal water. Can you talk about that, if there are those long-term solutions that are being floated out there, and kind of what the end goal from a kind of a permanent, more long-term basis looks like?
Let me start with the infrastructure dollars. I do know that there's large chunks of money that are coming in from some of the federal monies for infrastructure, specifically for municipal water hookups. So I think there will be definitely opportunities to aid communities like this with these kinds of long-term solutions. I think that's definitely something that is applicable. Normally what happens is the township or the local municipality would work with local health department and work to do those applications. We will have some grant programs. And so one of the local municipalities and or local water system would apply for that grant to actually do the extension and have the cost. Caitlin, do you want to talk about some of the things that you guys have talked about at the project level for long-term solutions with local public health? I haven't been in on a lot of those conversations.
Yeah, so like you said, we're really hoping that there's going to be grant funding for them to potentially hook up to the municipal water in the area. That is sort of our hope with how we would like this site to go, and whether or not they end up getting the funding, then it would sort of lead to another discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So there's a couple follow-up questions to that. So there was a question about it. Someone says it sounds like Herring's water system, their wells may also have contamination. And so is there any advantage to hook up to that if their well field is contaminated?
So the one advantage is that the local municipal water systems have pretty rigorous sampling schedules. And so they would have obligations to not only test for PFAS compounds, but a whole host, it's a very long list of other things that they test for. And if at any point EPA determines that there is going to be national standards for drinking water for PFAS, they would have to comply with those, and they may end up being lower than what we have here in the state, depending on how they do that evaluation. And so that kind of monitoring schedule will be done on a quarterly basis because they do have detections. They would be done probably on a quarterly basis for the foreseeable future, and subject to that continued oversight and enforcement under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so we have a whole unit within Eagle that does just the Safe Drinking Water Act and looks at those particular things. So the question is if you hook up to municipal water, then all of that is taken care of for you. You know that you're going to have water that's at an acceptable level according to the Safe Drinking Water Act, versus on your own well, that ends up being then your responsibility as a well owner to monitor your concentrations. And obviously in this case, we've just tested for PFAS, but you know, there's always the potential for other things to be there. So that's the primary reason why people would want to get hooked up. The other thing is that those, you know, concentrations are at acceptable levels within the city system right now, the municipal system.
Great, thank you. So as we're talking about that, do we have, and maybe this is another question for Caitlin, but what is the timeline for that? What might that look like? I know we're still in the investigation phase, but what is, if people are looking at, you know, bottom line, when might that happen? What does the timeline look like for connecting to a municipal water system?
Caitlin,
So
do you
that's
have
going to sort of depend on whether or not grant funding is available and if the township's eligible for it. So maybe Abby, you have some information about that. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more.
The money is still in discussions. When the legislature left for spring break here last week, Senate Bill 565 did have, gosh, it's a lot of money. Like, don't quote me, but I want to say it's like $2 billion for infrastructure funds. A good portion of that will be grant dollars specifically for these types of drinking water contamination issues, whether it be lead issues or PFAS issues, other contamination. So I would assume that Herring Township would qualify, but the money is not quite available yet. But I think we would encourage and work with the local officials and with Herring Township to kind of get ready for that when the money comes out and is rolled out for the grants, that they're ready to go ahead and do that application. Obviously, none of this will be quick because it takes time to go through that process and then to actually have the municipal water installed and hooked up to houses and stuff like that. So we will continue those conversations as quickly as we can, working through Caitlin as well as local health and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Thank you. So one last question I see here about the connection to the public water supply. Would residents be forced to connect? So if that's, you know, where we end up is connecting the area to the municipal water supply, would residents be forced to connect their home to that?
I don't know that we have a firm answer on that yet. I think it's going to depend on conversations and what else we find out about the contamination in the area and how widespread we think it is. At this point, I would hesitate to say I don't know that anybody will be forced.
Cool, thank you. There's a question here about watering outside, whether watering garden, plants, or vegetables, fruits, or animals and eating them, or animals eating the fruits and vegetables. How does the uptake happen there? Is there any concern with that ingestion pathway?
Lisa, you want to take that one from a DHHS perspective?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. The short answer is we don't have a ton of information on this pathway. There's a lot of different factors that can affect plant uptake of PFAS. But we just don't have a lot of information about how that can affect plants and animals. And Abby, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, we did do a very limited garden survey from another site where we had a similar situation. with higher levels of contamination in groundwater, and they did do some backyard produce testing. As I recall, Lisa, we didn't find much in that produce, if anything. And I know in the situations where we are studying crop uptake, it's with pretty significant groundwater. I know in one particular case, we've looked at crop uptake in a farm field that was being irrigated with contaminated water, 100 parts per billion or 100 parts per trillion type of range, and saw really no noticeable uptake. So, the levels at this particular location are pretty low. I wouldn't be especially concerned, but I think it's like Lisa says, is we don't have a ton of data. That research in understanding for crop uptake at this point is still ongoing. The biggest risk that we do see is for PFOS. That seems to be the contaminant that seems to be taken up into crops the most easiest and the most readily. And so I think PFNA is not one that I have seen, at least in the research and literature, being taken up into the crops. So that's kind of what we know at this point. We don't have a lot of firm data, but that would be what we know for this particular situation that'd be applicable.
Great, thank you. We have a question here from a resident who lives close to the landfill, and just whether or not there should be an increased concern to PFAS due to proximity. And then a couple of questions about maybe the pathway of most concern, and then whether it's drinking water, eating fish, if those are kind of considered the same pathway, that same ingestion pathway, if those are different. I mean, obviously they're treated differently because you've got your water in your house and you have to go out and get the fish. But talking about if there's an increased risk, and then how those pathways, how like each pathway maybe affects them, primarily.
So let's unpack that question a little bit. So I think the first part of the question is there an increased risk due to proximity? It looks like this person lives close to a landfill. We have, for the state of Michigan, gone through and prioritized all of our landfills. What we call our highest tier landfills have all been sampled for PFAS in general. They all have monitoring wells, and so they're all being sampled. Those are the ones that we thought were most likely to either have drinking water wells adjacent to it or most likely to have taken industrial sources. Those have all been sampled. And in those cases, if there were residential wells around them, we've taken a look and have contacted people for sampling. Most of those you'll find on our MPART website now. So I think if you live close to a landfill that's been identified, while there's always an increased risk, I guess you should check and see if it's already on our MPART website or if there's any other information that you have, and contact us. I mean, it's fine to reach out if you're worried about a landfill that's close to your house. The question about not all landfills have significant concentrations of PFAS. Some do, but not all of them are going to be super high levels of PFAS. If the leachate goes to the local wastewater treatment plant, then the local wastewater treatment plant is by now putting a limit on the PFAS levels that the landfill can discharge to the local wastewater treatment plant. They don't want high strength sources either. So they've got some sort of cooperative arrangement between the landfill and the wastewater treatment plant. We're doing that because that then reduces sources so that the wastewater treatment plants then aren't discharging additional PFAS into the environment through their discharges. So if you have the last part of this resident's question is, would drinking contaminated water and eating contaminated fish then increase their risks? And yes, obviously, if you had drinking water that was contaminated, then that's going to increase your risk levels. We are sampling a lot of fish throughout the state of Michigan. Not all fish is contaminated. I will say that, like Lisa said, you should check out the Eat Safe fish guide for your specific part of the state. And you can check out the MPART webpage. There's quite a bit of information on PFAS in fish sampling around the state. PFAS is not, PFOS specifically, is not always the driver for fish consumption advisories. Often it's still mercury. We have a statewide mercury guidance for fish in our state. And so that's usually the driver, but there are some instances where we've found some higher concentrations of PFOS that are of concern. And in a couple of cases, we've got some do not eat advisories out. So hopefully that answered most of those questions for that.
Thanks, and thanks for interpreting my question and asking there. Caitlin, can you scroll back? I think there's a question on the tables that were presented in the PowerPoint. I'm looking at slide 23, has the MDHHS comparison values. And then slide 11, I believe it is, has the Michigan PFAS standards. And I don't know if they were just out of order, might be what I'm looking at, or if those are different values. But there was a question on whether or not those values actually lined up with one another. I think that they're the same. I think they were just in different order on the table, but I want to confirm that with one of you guys before I respond.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So these are the comparison values that MDHHS uses. You can see the little A and the B next to the comparison values. So we use the lowest of two different health-based screening levels. So most of them are the health-based values, also known as the maximum contaminant levels, if we're talking about like a public water supply. And so the MCL for PFOS is 16 parts per trillion, but there's also the DHHS public health drinking water screening level, which is at 8 parts per trillion for PFOS. And so we use the 8 parts per trillion instead of the 16 parts per trillion for our comparison values. And I'll just say that, they're both designed to protect sensitive populations, but there's a lot of different safety factors that are built into these health-based values, both of them. And so there was a little bit of different interpretation when deciding how many of those safety factors to put in. So, I mean, they're both health protective. They're just, slightly different. So we just use the lower of the two health-based values that are available here in Michigan.
Great, thank you. There's a question here on how to get printed reports of the results from sampling. So how would one get their report?
We just sent out results letters in the mail last Thursday, so the residents should be getting them this week. If you don't get them, just give me a call or shoot me an email. Make sure that they went to the right address or something like that. So just contact me if you haven't gotten your letter by next week.
Great, thank you. Has there ever been a sample taken right from the Clam River to identify if there's any PFAS in the river?
And I want to say no, but Caitlin, are you aware of any samples in that area as far as surface water samples?
I am not aware of any samples being taken.
Yeah, I don't think we had any. We can recommend it to our water quality assessment unit who does surface water quality sampling throughout the year. We can recommend it to them. Usually we try to prioritize that work based on, potential sources or potential risks. But at this point, I don't think we have any data in that area that we don't have any data in that area. Let me just say it that way.
Great, thank you. So I think I must have misstated a question earlier about the water, the outside water. So the question is just bottom line, why are the filters provided only for indoor use? Why is there not, any options being given to residents for their outside hose.
Yeah, so those filters go under the kitchen sink because that's typically where people most frequently get their drinking water from. And so really, you know, our main goal in protecting public health is to ensure that people have drinking water that does not have PFAS in it. So that's why we provide the point of use filters that get installed under the kitchen sink.
The other reason is logistically, those filters are only rated for half a gallon a minute. They are somewhat slow, and so it just wouldn't be practical for an outside hose bib. In order to get enough pressure for an outside hose bib, you would basically need a whole house filter, which would have to be, again, is slow, but it would, you know, be a bigger system that would be, you know, 8 gallons or more a minute in order to do an outside hose bib. So.
Great, thank you. Are there any grants for testing residents' water? So if they're, I know obviously we've talked about this 6 month going out and retesting, but if there's an interest in getting their water tested outside of that schedule, are there grants available for that?
There's no grants, but the cost of that independent testing is coming down. They can do it directly through the Eagle Lab or their private entities. We've got a list on our MPART website, but the cost is down to, I think, $250, $270, something like that, to do a PFAS, a full PFAS drinking water scan. And so, you know, that's pretty reasonable. We started out 4 or 5 years ago at $1,000 a sample. So it's come down quite a bit in price. I'm not aware of any specific grant stuff, but I would suggest, you know, definitely reaching out to Department of Health and Human Services and walking through your test results and really understanding those and the, you know, the potential risk, because I think that we should be getting your results for one thing, but knowing that you're going to get resampled within 6 months should, plus having the filter, should give some peace of mind.
Thank you. So it said here that from one of the slides, it says we've tested around CTC. Are there any plans of testing west of the freeway?
No, so at this point in time, Eagle does not have any plans to conduct any sort of groundwater investigation at the area. Right now, our focus is just mainly on the residential wells nearby and trying to see if we can get them hooked up to the municipal water.
Caitlin, can you go back to that map with the, maybe with the sampling results?
Yeah.
I think, is it safe to say, Caitlin, that at this point, we haven't really found a high strength source like we would normally find in a PFAS investigation?
Correct. If we had to guess, we would guess that there's multiple sources contributing to the PFAS that we're seeing out here.
Okay. Yeah, I will say in comparison, I mean, there are, you don't have the same contaminants in every single well, which is something we look for. Does it look like the contamination is at one particular level, or is it one particular plume? This data doesn't really lend itself necessarily to thinking that it's one particular plume, but maybe a number of individual or smaller plumes. And so we are, I think we'll continue to look at the data, but it doesn't look like something that is what we would consider a really high strength source in the area, which is obviously good news, but it does make it a puzzling investigation at this point.
So there's still a couple questions, and I know we talked about kind of how, oops, I think we do have a hand up. So I will get to the hand raise. I just saw that. I apologize to the caller who has their hand up. But we do still have a couple questions that are coming in about just the timeline moving forward. And so, you know, is there, you know, how many rounds? I'm trying to kind of formulate it in my head. You know, we have these 6 month sampling windows. And so when we think about, you know, a long-term solution, What is that timeline when we're going to kind of come to that point where we have to make this decision that we're going to do X as a final solution?
I don't think we're quite at that timeline yet. I think we're, the money has not actually left the legislature yet. So we'll continue to work with local health, with the township, with the local officials, and start preparing for the grant funding that's most likely coming. But I don't think we have a timeline at this point. So we're still early in this investigation. Caitlin, anything else you want to add to that?
No, nothing to add, but most likely nothing's going to happen soon. Whatever does happen probably will take some time.
Do you know why? It sounds like the township says that they have funding. Does anyone know why, maybe the local health department, why the township is saying that they have funding for this and they're waiting on Eagle to move forward?
I don't have that information. I don't think we have anyone from the township on today, unless if there's anyone from the township on the call that would like to raise their hand, maybe we can unmute them and they can contribute, but I don't know of that information.
Okay, I will keep an eye out. I'm gonna go real quick to, we have a hand up from a phone caller. So 9531, if you could hit *6 on your phone, that's *6, and that'll unmute you. And you should be able to jump in. You're still on mute. There you go. Oops, you went back on mute.
Looks like they're off now.
Yep, are you there? Looks like you're on. We can hear you if you can start talking.
Hello.
Hey, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I did have a couple questions. The city of Cadillac has a non-detect for PFAS. They're also right in the vicinity of this area. Wouldn't it make sense just to have the two municipalities, Herring Township and the city of Cadillac, work together and extend the city of Cadillac's water out there and eliminate all risk very quickly? And it would avoid the testing that is going on and the mystery of where the source is coming from. And why wouldn't that be considered? Herring already has PFAS in their water to some degree, and apparently that source is unknown as well. I do have 3 quick questions, but this would be my first one, is why not just use a municipal system that's right in the same vicinity? It goes to the Wexford County Jail, which is just under the Freeway, and a line could be extended through that, and some deal worked out relative to payment that would be fair for all parties.
That's a great question. I'm going to ask, I see Ross Gladding is on the call with our Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division. Ross, if you could maybe raise your hand and unmute yourself, or we can unmute you. I think, does he have to push *6 then? First up, yeah. There we go. Okay, Ross, I think you're unmuted now.
Okay. I mean, those all options are on the table, so don't think that other things are not being looked at. But obviously, it's these things are an engineered system. Distance to connect could be further, more costly. So all those things have to be considered. And we've talked about the concept that there are 2 different supplies in the area. So, that's the kind of stuff that's shaking out and part of the discussions at this point. So maybe it was not brought up in this meeting, but it has been discussed, and I'm sure it will be discussed in the future. But Herring Township is literally about 100 feet away. So that is the probably the most likely option because of logistics.
I just point out they already have PFAS. Their source also is unknown, and it causes a touchy future if it's unknown, and you do have a source that's available as well that could also correct the problem without risk to the folks that are in this position. Thank you. I had another question. The Clam River was discussed, and landfills have been discussed, and the city had taken in leachate for, I won't say centuries, but it's been decades, from the landfill, and they had huge numbers of PFAS discovered years after it had been ongoing. And it does get released as a discharge effluent into the Clam River, and that's been going on for decades. And there was a question about the Clam River being tested. But since that has been going on forever, at least up until the super well was built out at the landfill in Wexford, and the process of bringing in the leachate into the Cadillac City sewer system discontinued. It has now discontinued, but the PFAS was coming in there for years, and that also might be an explanation with regard to the various PFAS components that are being found that are confusing everyone because they're not the same. They don't look like they're coming from one source, and the landfill is always a suspect. But we have had a contact with that landfill for decades, and it's gone right through the Clam River, which of course there's a positive on the Herring system on one side, and now there's a positive on the other side with the CTC ISD. I'm just curious about testing the Clam River, focusing on that area since it appears to be in the middle of this whole thing. And my other question along with that is, how far is the circle going to go out checking residents around John R. until we get to a point where it no longer is showing positives? And that would probably also help us find the source if we're going the testing direction. And the other options are to hook up to municipality systems such as Wexford County did years ago near the landfill when other chemicals were found out there. That was their quick solution after spending $1 million trying to figure out what was going on with the water underground, because they just couldn't figure it out, and they spent $1 million. I won't say wasted, but they attempted to find the source, and they couldn't find it even at the landfill where it was coming from, and had to go to a municipal system. So a couple questions, the Clam River, to look at that, and also how far and how wide would the circle be around John R. and CTC. I mean, if every home almost in John R. except 6 had a detection, it seems like it would make sense to keep going and widening the circle to find out where this ends, to at least continue to find it if we're not going to just simply hook up a municipal system that we know is PFAS clean that's sitting a half a mile or less around the corner.
Thank you for that. Before you get off, can you tell us the name of the landfill, just so I know which one we're talking about?
Well, that's a good question too. The Wexford County landfill in between Manton and Cadillac has been trucking in leachate for decades into the city of Cadillac, and the city's been running that contaminant through its sewer system, and it was determined right before they stopped. It was like 500 and 600 parts of certain PFAS levels that were just astounding and probably unknown. However, the effluent's been tested constantly, and it's just below the legal, it's permitted, but however, it had been going on for a long time, and I'm just curious if that could be the source and not people's septic tanks leaking. It just seems that PFNX is an odd one to be coming from someone's septic system. And also industrial sources go into the Cadillac City sewer, and that's another option that could be happening. But again, that's all being, I won't say dumped, but it's being let off into the Clam River. which is, of course, showing signs of pollution on both sides. One in the Herring well system that's up toward the main street of Cadillac, which is Mitchell, and Business US 131 is also what it's called. And it's also, again, showing up now in CTC, the ISD, John R. And Baker had a hot well, and they closed it down. So it's across the street by Baker as well. And although Baker and the YMCA are non-detect at this point, there was a time within the last 3 or 4 years, one of the Baker wells that was attached to the new dorm or new housing project next to the college was a hot well. And when they opened that up, they had to discontinue that well and go a different direction as well. And I believe there is municipal water from Herring to Baker College. I'm not sure, but that again also contains some level of PFAS and is also should be watched closely, in at least my opinion. And I do want to thank Abigail and everybody that's doing this meeting tonight and sharing everything they are with our Cadillac and Herring Township residents in this area. I do serve on a committee with Abigail, and the DEQ, now known as Eagle, has done a very good job trying to explain to everybody in the state what's been going on and what we do need to do as citizens is support them with funding and thank them for their efforts that they've taken to bring this issue to light and to find a solution, not only in this area, but throughout the state of Michigan.
Thank you. Thanks. And we will, we'll talk with the team more about that particular landfill and about, obviously additional options for long-term solutions, because as Ross said, there's nothing off the table at this point. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have another hand raised. So Marlene Whetstone, I think you can unmute yourself whenever.
*6, is that it?
It looks like she's on Zoom. So Marlene, if you're there, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Oh, she put her hand down. May not have a question anymore. So if you do, feel free to raise your hand again, and we'll get back to you. I had a question. I know this was one of the slides in the presentation, but general groundwater flow. What way does groundwater flow in the area? Kaylin, I don't know if you have that slide you can swing to real quick.
Yep. So it flows to the west northwest. So I'll bring that back up.
All right, great. And then I think as you're kind of moving through the slide there's a follow-up question on, I think it's slide, what do I got here, 37. Curious about the depth of those residential wells, and if those are all screened kind of at the same depth, or if there's different depths. There was a question specifically about the green ones, how deep those are.
So we, and maybe somebody from the local health department can jump in here, but we actually don't have records for a lot of these wells in the area. They are not on our database that we have. Does anybody from the local health department have anything to add?
This is Michael. I don't have anything further to add at this point.
So a lot of the well depths are unknown.
Yeah, this is Megan from the local health department. Sometimes residents will have like copies of their well logs. So this would be like at the time like your well was installed, the well driller would complete what's called a well log pump record. Sometimes residents will have keep that in their own files. You can always come to the health department to do a search to see if we have anything that's on file for you. Also, there's the state's database called Well Logic, which is like an online platform that's accessible to anybody. So you can type in the address to see if a well log is available for a certain location.
I think it's Megan, though, it's safe to say that between all of the local health department, Department of Health and Human Services, as well as Caitlin and the Eagle team, that we've looked for all available well logs that we can find, correct?
Yep, correct.
That's usually one of the first things we do with these kinds of investigations, is try to determine depths of wells. But not all of the homes have wells due to a variety of reasons. But if somebody has their well log and would like to share it with the team, that would be very helpful. Okay,
Great, thank you. So actually, this might be poor Ross was pulled into the meeting, but I might have another question for him, as I believe, Ross, you were the one that brought up communication with the city of Cadillac. There was a resident said that they were brushed off, and were told that there was no way that this was an option to connect to the city of Cadillac system. I guess kind of big picture is how, maybe how is this an option when that has been the response to a citizen? Are these, are these real conversations that are happening? Sort of what, we're talking about big picture. There's still those, kind of those concerns about a long-term big picture solution, and maybe just how real something like that might be.
So I'm not familiar with who would have said that to this person. But obviously in these situations, there's a lot of people who have a lot of answers, and not all of them probably should be answering questions. But these are a lot of different jurisdictions. So Cadillac has to be able to bring on more people in the terms of them having enough capacity to do it. Like I said, there's the logistics side of it. Herring is closer. So these are all things that, as Abigail said, that we're not, everything's on the table. So we're weighing all those things, but at the same time, there's multiple parties here that would be involved in coming together to finalize any kind of plan. And that's sort of where we're at is, let's figure out our options, and go from there. So that's the step we're at, I would say, at this point.
Gotcha. Thank you. Scott. Yeah, Scott, did you have a question or a comment you wanted to add in there?
Yes. Well, what I wanted to say was Cadillac and Herring Township are basically two separate municipalities. The city of Cadillac, as I understand it, would not and could not serve water to Herring Township unless there was an agreement between the two entities. And as I understand it, the city of Cadillac won't provide any utilities to anybody outside their jurisdiction unless they're allowed to annex them. So politically speaking, right now, that's probably not a possibility. The fact Herring Township has a viable water supply, it's close by, and it is functional and useful. So that is probably the best route to go. That's not to say that Cadillac couldn't serve them from a physicality standpoint, but from a political and legal standpoint, that's a whole nother issue.
Can I ask one more question?
Yep.
Is it possible to provide grant money to Herring Township then to get their well moved to a location that there's no PFAS? They've put it into a place close to the Clam River, and that looks to be an issue. And another quick solution would be to have them move their wells, and that would also not involve the politics. The politics might be set aside on an issue like this when there's contamination. Nothing like this has come up. The township and the city just did do a settlement. It was very long-term annexation, and it involved an addition of 800 acres to the city of Cadillac. So they obviously have the capacity, but there are some politics, yes, but could they be set aside when it's people's health as opposed to money and other issues that are usually dividing the townships? On the other hand, taking another look at it could be, let's just move the herring wells to a location that we can guarantee would be contaminant free, and if nothing else, PFAS free, to avoid this source, because this source is in that vicinity. And if you're not going to just simply run the city lines out there, which would be an immediate solution, the other closest solution to rid herring of PFAS as well, which could be climbing and maybe not, but it's certainly consistently in their system. And it's also being dropped all the way around the township on a 24/7 basis by pipes that are shooting water into the ground, so that their system actually flows properly because it wasn't designed correctly due to the fact that there's dead ends and just the way the township's set up. But another quick solution could be, although expensive and they would need grant money, is just simply move the Herring Township wells out of there and put them in a different location in Herring Township that's far enough away from either industrial contaminants coming out in that direction from the city historically and PFAS, which looks to be coming from the Clam River vicinity, and to move it elsewhere. It's very close. It's just on the other side of the Clam from the CTC and ISD. And if the politics are in the way, there's another simple solution. It's simply moving the wells in Herring Township to a point where there's no PFAS. And it also solves the problems for the water that's going to all our fast food restaurants, every commercial district item that's going on out in Herring Township, which is a wonderful commercial district and a highly used area for restaurants. Again, there's at least 5 fast food places out there where people are constantly.
If I may, I can answer your question. I do know this, that this is Scott Conradson again. Herring Township is looking into placing some new wells in different locations.
That's great news, and that would be also the fastest solution. And so I would just recommend, after being a county commissioner and watching us spend $1 million and trying everything we could to avoid putting in a municipal system, just to say the heck with it and go with the municipal system, one of them, even if it's temporarily at the city until the township can move their well or vice versa. But there's a solution in the works here that doesn't require all this testing, and we can, just open the circle and figure out how wide it has to be and solve Herring's issue, because they do have an issue with their wells, although it's legal, but PFAS is in there, and that theoretically could increase over years if we're looking at septic leakage and so forth. But that, if we could help some Herring move their wells.
Absolutely. I think I'm talking to, is this Bill?
It is. Thank you, Bill.
I thought I recognized your voice, Bill. Yeah, no doubt about it. Herring's wells are, they're approaching 30, 35 years old. They've been there a while. The average municipal well lasts about 50 years. So their system is certainly, beyond the 50% point of its useful lifespan. That's not to say it can't last longer than that, but certainly that is a possibility. And I know Herring Township has been considering looking into relocating their wells in the future. So that could be part of this solution as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'd like to put another request out if there are any Herring Township local public officials or any county officials that are on the call. If you, we've had a lot of questions today about the township, about what's happening at the township level, and some of the relationship that is happening between Eagle and the township. So if there is anybody who is attending, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand and you are comfortable speaking to that, we would love to hear from you, just to kind of help answer some of those questions about what's happening at the township level that we don't have the answers to at this time. There's a couple questions that we've hit on already, but I want to circle back because we did get a couple questions about it. The first one, and I'll try and answer them, and Abby, you can come in and go ahead and correct me. But question about the whole house filter. When we discussed that, that just wasn't a viable long-term solution. We know that, but in the short term, the funding isn't there the way that we can provide single filters to folks. And so in the long term, it's not a viable long-term solution. In the short term, it's not fiscally possible to do that with the program that we have.
Yeah, I'll just add in that because every plumbing system in every house is a little bit different, whole house filters aren't necessarily an off-the-shelf thing that, you know, they're going to be $3,000 to $5,000 a house. And it's not one of those just plug and play. You need to, again, do maintenance, do monitoring, there's ongoing sampling. So it's a lot of intrusion. We've had a few cases around the state where we've had liable parties put in whole house filters, but again, they were in those houses frequently testing, and eventually they did switch over to municipal water because that was their long-term solution. So because we want to get to that long-term solution, the under the kitchen sink filters are the most reliable and effective way that we have. And because we're talking about drinking water as primary route of risk for ingestion, that's what we can both be efficient and effective with the money, as well as protecting public health. So.
Great, thank you. And it looks like Marlene, you've got your hand up, so you should be able to unmute yourself. And yep, there you go.
Okay, I'm a Herring Township trustee, and Herring Township is looking at this. We've worked with Scott Conradson. He's been to our meetings about this. He's been really a lot of help for us to navigate this, and we are taking this very seriously. We've had some preliminary engineering done, and Scott has been a great resource for us. And that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think that makes sense. I know there were some questions about the engineering that the township was doing. So the fact that you're starting that process and have some preliminary engineering being done, I appreciate that. Thanks for jumping on there, Marlene. The other question that I wanted to circle back to that I know we kind of touched on, the testing we've talked about is the price is coming down. And so because it's so cheap, the question is why wouldn't Eagle do more testing? And I think we talked about, the 6-month testing period is based on the filters. And so the way that we go out and we do the sampling is, sampling based on the lifespan of those filters, not necessarily that we're trying to, we're being cheap about it. We're going based on what that exposure might be based on the filters that are being installed. So the sampling that we're doing is not, just because if the price goes down, we're not going to necessarily do more sampling. It's really based on the exposure that may happen with the filters installed. Abby, did I hit on that okay?
You did great. You did great, Mike. Yep.
All right, excellent. I have let the Q&A get away from me. So if you see any, Abby, that are in here, feel free to just steal it and jump in.
I think we've hit them all. I think we're in pretty good shape. I will say that, based on the interest level, I can definitely foresee us having some sort of an update meeting, working with the township, with the city, with all the local health departments and everybody else that's been involved. I think, there's a lot of conversations that need to be had about coordination, about potential options, about costs, about, who's the best to do these things for the residents. So there will be a lot of conversations that go on behind the scenes. But I do anticipate probably, in a few months' time or maybe 6 months, we'll come back and have an update meeting for people, just because I think there's been enough conversations that the situation probably warranted. So don't be I think don't be a stranger, reach out to Caitlin and the Eagle team for updates on sampling. Go ahead and reach out to Lisa Fisher for any updates with, yep, we've got all the names here. If you want contacts on DHHS on any of the filters, definitely talk with local public health, with Megan and Katie on filter replacements, and Scott definitely with municipal water supply system stuff. So he is involved in those conversations and will be one of your main contacts for that. So I think we've answered. I haven't seen anything else.
If I have kind of two, maybe one question for the group here. I know Marlene kind of hit on it, that there has been these communications between Eagle and the township. Those are continuing. So I didn't know if anybody else from Eagle that's on the panel here tonight, or in the group here tonight, wanted to hit on just that relationship at all. But I know that's a big part of this, of this is building those relationships and making sure that we're staying in communication. So I just wanted to hit on that. If anyone else on the call wanted to touch on anything before I have one last follow-up point about the questions and answers here. So, and then I'll just say that I will provide everybody who was on the call from Eagle DHHS a questions and answer report. So know that, like I said, we kind of ran through as many of these questions, tried to answer as many as possible in the way that we felt was best as possible. But everyone will get that report with all the questions and answers. So hopefully if we didn't get to it, we will follow up. But again, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're going to provide, a recording of this webinar, as well as the slides to everybody who attended. So you'll have all the contact information. Like Abigail said, don't be shy. Please reach out to us. We want to make sure that you're comfortable with the information that's provided. But you may be receiving some follow-up if there's questions that were asked tonight that need some additional response. So don't be surprised if that happens. Abby, you have any closing words before I sign off here?
No, I just want to appreciate everyone again for coming out tonight, for sticking with us on this pretty complex topic. This is, municipal water seems like an easy solution, but there's a lot of details that go into it. And it's not all political. There's just a lot of logistics of making sure the piping is right, the sizing is right. Scott handles all that stuff and makes sure that it's all conforming with all of the municipal water requirements that they have under the law. But there's a lot of details that go into these conversations. So those conversations do need to be happening, and we'll continue to coordinate with all the agencies to make sure that everybody's in the loop and knows what's going on, and we're making the best possible decisions for public health.
Great,
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks again. And thanks to everybody who presented. And thanks again for everybody who jumped on to attend and have this conversation with us. And like Abby said, we will be talking again soon. So thanks and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.